I am Courtney Brown. I'm the director of the Far Sight Institute, and we study the remote viewing phenomenon as it is done using procedures that were developed by the United States military and used for espionage purposes. And so we have a lot of projects that we've done. Some of them are basic scientific projects using remote viewing to explore the nature of time and physical reality. And then we also do operational targets that are projects where we actually use remote viewing to find out things such as ancient technologically advanced civilizations on Earth, or in this case, who and how the pyramids out there in Egypt were actually built, because mainstream science has a story about how they think they were built. And if you listen carefully to their ideas, it is absolutely certifiably crazy. They basically say that the 80-ton blocks of stone of granite that were mined from a quarry near the Aswan area, 500 miles, 800 kilometers away from Giza, and cut and moved there. And they basically said that they were rolling those things on logs and then putting them in a boat and shipping them up the Nile. And I sort of figured we'd see something like that. And then when the remote viewing data started coming in, I started to rethink about exactly what mainstream science was saying. First of all, these stone blocks are the size of a school bus. These are huge. And to think that they were just rolling and they're 80 tons, they were rolling them around on logs. How would they get them on the logs in the first place? And then to think that they were cutting them and moving them and putting them in a reed boat or a wooden boat on the Nile. I mean, that is so ludicrous. You put an 80-ton block on one of those boats, it'd sink in a second. I mean, it'd be like a giant just squashing it. It wouldn't float. This is the craziest thing. The mainstream says that they were cutting the blocks by using their crude hammers and chisels to make a crack in the rock. And then they were putting some wood chips in the crack and then spraying water on the wood chips. And the wood chips would swell up and crack the block out of the rock. If you think you can do that, go up to any cliff face. You have cliff faces. Go up to any cliff face anywhere, find a crack and put some wood chips in there and put your canteen on it. Spread some water on it. tell me if the mountain will crack open. And this is not shoddy construction. These stone blocks, which are huge, are perfectly manufactured. They're perfectly cut. There's no error between the sides of these things. And you have to cut all four sides, plus you have to slice it on the top, and you have to slice it on the bottom. And so the only way this thing could have been done is by using power of some type. And when Dick Allgaier, under totally blind conditions, was given the target, for example, of the mining operation, he described it exactly. High technology was used. It would produce a beam that would actually vulcanize the rock on all four sides, which is how they got the sides to be so straight. And they sliced it. They literally sliced it out of the quarry walls, and that's how they made them so perfect. So nothing that mainstream says makes sense, but the idea of using energy devices to slice them, given what we see on the ground today, that makes like total sense, because that's the only way they could have gotten them to be so perfectly squared off with absolutely no variation in the sides, and to move them and cut them in the first place. And then, the mainstream says that this thing, the Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, was constructed over a 20-year period. Well, if that is true, that they had to cut 12 of these great big stone blocks out of the quarry and put them on the boats, ship them up, and install them every hour of every 24-hour day for 20 years. You gotta be joking. So when I started to get these data in, I just said, okay, let's throw mainstream completely under the bus and just forget about it and find out how these things were actually built. So the mining involved a lot of very high technology stuff. The people that were doing the mining were actually different from the people who were doing the assembly. Because when you're using these energy devices to slice the rocks, you're melting rock, you're producing volcanism, and you can't breathe that. So the toxic air quality associated with that mining operation made it absolutely impossible for normal people to to participate in that. So what actually happened is that there were some extraterrestrials that were involved in the construction of the entire project. And what they did was they genetically engineered a special group of people that were clones of each other. And they were specially designed to be able to withstand these toxic environments better than you or I or normal humans could. But they could only withstand it for so long before they became defective, and a new crop of those guys had to be done. And then once the blocks were cut and moved out of the quarry, then they could be handled the rest of the way by normal humans. But there was a lot of high technology that was used to do all this, and the extraterrestrials were involved with that. Another form of technology was used to move them. They weren't rolled on logs. They were levitated. They were lifted up, and they were lifted up. Daz Smith was very clear on this. He was the remote viewer that really focused on the movement of the logs themselves. They were levitated between 18 inches and 24 inches above ground, and the workers did not have to use any brute force to move those rocks. They basically just manipulated them. The blocks themselves were being floated, so they just had to manipulate them into place, and that's how they got so many blocks moved so quickly. They were just sliding them into place. So with regard to levitation technologies, we actually know of a number of ways for levitation to work. There's acoustic levitation, and Daz Smith did say that this process that was used to move the stone blocks was in part based on sound, meaning sound was part of it, but not all of it. He called it sound plus. But acoustic levitation, you can actually see good videos of that on YouTube. Just search for acoustic levitation. You can see things being floated around, not even moved horizontally using sound waves alone. And then we also have magnetic levitation. For example, the magnetic trains in Japan go 200 miles an hour, and they don't touch anything. That's yet another form of levitation that we know. And, you know, it's assumed that the extraterrestrials would have known about those plus other methods for levitation. Anyway, that's what happened. The blocks were lifted up through technology and simply manipulated into place by humans. Now, the humans did not understand the technology, and their job was just to manipulate those blocks into place. The more unsettling thing is that the entire pyramid construction process seems to have been part of a large program to control the human population in a very unhealthy way. And after they were built, with lots of lives being lost and lots of suffering, then a religion was created out of them, basically a light show. And Dick Algar describes the light show at the end when it was all constructed, channeling energy through it. I mean, it was very, very impressive, and a religion was constructed out of it. So what basically happened is, during the period that they were being built, the human population was exhausted. They were being manipulated into building these crazy things, and it was very much like a prison project, in the sense that if someone goes to prison, the guards give them a sledgehammer and say, here, go out and crack those rocks. And at the end of the day, they've cracked a lot of rocks, but they're exhausted, too exhausted to think about escape or revolt. And then you had, after that, the creation of the religion. It was brainwashing at its best. You wear them down physically, and then you convince them some type of crazy belief system, and you subjugated them. That's what it seems like it was all about. And then Daz Smith, at the end of the documentary, describes how a second group of extraterrestrials came after most of the pyramids had been done and disrupted the whole thing, essentially chasing the first group of extraterrestrials off, leaving the second group to instill some new knowledge, some new awareness, some new understanding. And that resulted in the complete collapse of the old civilization. And over a period of about 10 years, everybody just dissolved away. They just left. So the second group of extraterrestrials, they basically were able to, it looks like they were able to chase off the first group of extraterrestrials without having any type of space battles or anything. So we really don't know what happened to the first group of extraterrestrials. They could still be here today. You know, I'm just speculating at this point. I look at the 20th century, for example, up to the current time period, and I look at all the wars and battles that we fight, and I say, are we crazy as a species? Are we fundamentally defective? Or is there somebody messing with us? In the Great Pyramid of Giza, that first group of extraterrestrials was apparently, we don't have any images of them at all standing next to and talking with the human elite. So it looks like they were manipulating the elite behind the scenes, perhaps telepathically, whatever they were doing, they were getting them to do what they wanted. Well, if they could do that then they could do that now. I'm not able to prove that, but it does make speculative sense. So if the extraterrestrials had that ability, as it does seem they had back at the old Great Pyramid of Giza days, why would that same group not have that ability to mess with human leadership today? It's a question worth raising. If you look at the previous project, the so-called Atlantis project, which was an underwater anomaly off the coast of Morocco and Portugal, that project was very interesting because we now dated that to 70,000 years in the past, and we know that because even mainstream acknowledges that was when the big explosion happened that killed off most of the population of the planet. And the architecture that was available back then looked a lot like our current architecture. They had rectangular buildings made of metal and concrete and cinder blocks, things like that. You had nothing that resembled the pyramids. So what we have is something that was sort of human civilization developing on its own 70,000 years ago, destroying itself. And then you have human civilization again 15,000 years ago, involved in this pyramid construction, building a completely different architecture, involved in brand new religions, extraterrestrial manipulation, and then that collapses. And then you get another civilization rising up that looks exactly like the old one of 70,000 years ago. So we have skyscrapers, our architecture is functional, you can put a lot of people in the buildings. So it looks like when humans are left to their own devices, we get buildings like we have today. So it looks like what was done during the pyramid time was totally a result of manipulation. It wasn't something that was natural for us. The buildings themselves, according to the remote viewing results, which were interesting because they were done under totally blind conditions, were capable of channeling what they call ley lines, or energy sort of coming out of the Earth. So we do know that there's a lot of magnetic energy in the Earth. That's what functions, that's what helps our compasses to work and so on. But it's more than just the magnetic energy. There's energy in the planet that seems to flow along lines, and the pyramids seem to be structured to be able to manipulate, channel that energy. So they're not creating the energy, but they're sort of manipulating it, so on. And it does appear that some energy can be detected even today associated with the pyramids. So that's actually not surprising. But it does appear that the ability to manipulate energy was part of the overall design to create the religion, because then at the end, we have very clear remote viewings of this, that a light show essentially was created with thousands upon thousands of people gathered around the pyramids looking up at this huge light show that was involved with that. And that helped to solidify the religion, the religious aspect of this. It's going to take a time for us to sort of follow all that through. But one of the sort of obvious thoughts that we have is that when we look at our planet, we look at the great variety of people and groups that we have on our planet. I mean, it's a huge variety. If you think in terms of the racial differences, we have African, Caucasian, Pygmy, Aborigine, Asian, Native American. I mean, it goes on and on and on with all the different groups. And if you look at people who have been reporting back with the so-called abduction phenomena, where there's actual interactions with extraterrestrials, It's a very interesting phenomenon because from those people, you don't get any type of sense that the extraterrestrials that are being interacted with are from very heterogeneous types of groups. It's like if they come from one star system, they're all like a certain type. Another star system, they're all like another type. They have a great deal of homogeneity based on what cultures and so on they come from. And the nations on our planet seem to be a real wild group of very great heterogeneity in terms of different groups. And then if you also look at the people, the individual people, not just the nations, but the individuals that are involved, you get a tremendous amount of heterogeneity as well. And you get an enormous number of artists, scientists, hugely creative people. And among the same population, you also get a very large population of pervert, crazy people, mean people. So it's almost as if this planet is a place of, I hate to say it, but it's almost as if it looks, at least on the surface, like a dumping ground for groups from all over the galaxy, where they get rid of both creative, artistic, rabble-rousers, people, because inventors and creative people and artists, they're interested in, changing the world, turning it upside down. And if you look at a society that's been around stably for, say, 1 million years, well, they've invented everything that they're going to invent, and the last thing they want is an artist or a revolutionary or inventor to come in and say, let's redo everything. So one way to get rid of those people is to sort of dump them off someplace else as troublemakers. On the other hand, there's probably people who are just plain perverts, mean, nasty, criminal types, and you'd want to dump them off here too, perhaps. So if you think of this as being run as a prison planet, when the pyramids were being done, maybe there's something to that analogy. Maybe, in fact, there was something like a prison sort of concept going on. It's unclear. Greg, it's just plain unclear. But it's possible. There's another issue, which is when we have all of these movies, you sort of wonder, are we having these movies because we're sort of remembering? There's just an awful lot of themes like that. And you have to sort of ask, are these themes because people are sort of remembering this idea of alien intervention in the human past? Or the Star Wars thing, for example, is a huge battle, a galactic battle. And I've actually wondered many times if, in fact, something along those lines didn't actually happen. And what we ended up becoming, if we became a prison planet, I'm wondering if it was because of that conflict. If there was a conflict elsewhere, and some people wanted to flee that conflict, they might have come to Earth. And if some people started to come to Earth as refugees, maybe authorities from the conflict area actually followed them and said, well, let's keep them here. Let's keep them locked up. And maybe that's how the prison thing came. And if the authorities were trying to control the development and the memory of the human population, maybe it's because the humans would have remembered what happened to them in the past. Authorities are so absolutely crucial about not letting this stuff out. This is exactly why they keep this stuff under wraps. Yeah, we have a government, a series of governments all over the planet that are deathly afraid of the population finding out exactly who they are and where they came from and what the larger scope of things are. But that has to happen eventually. It can't continue forever that we do this. And so the Farsight Institute is actually serving a very great role right now in terms of helping the planet make that transition.